Agenda 2063, it was around about the same time that the SDGs were going on. What is very impressive in the whole process is the inclusivity and extensive consultations. For those of you that took time with the Agenda 2030, you can understand that when I talk about consultations, it's needed on something of such a huge scale. Well, we started off with having a strategic plan that was looking at what was happening on the continent. And what we noticed was that we have been working with our best, or the half of our team, the very good part of the team left behind, and that was women. So we decided that whatever we were going to do, we were going to have gender equality and women's empowerment right there as a priority. So we started off with that, and we introduced the Agenda 2063. It was followed by several activities, that ensured that women were on the forefront in African Union activities. And since that time, we have achieved quite a lot, actually. Eventually, I'll name a few things that we have done.
Thanks. And Simone, the report that we just launched is the first of its kind, as we heard, to look at the 2030 agenda as a whole from a gender perspective, showing how gender equality is relevant to all 17 SDGs. Apart from providing an overview of the status of gender equality, the report zooms in on two focus policy areas: violence against women and girls, and unpaid care work. The purpose of that was to provide policy guidance to policymakers on how to achieve these targets of the SDGs. Explain to everybody why these two areas were highlighted, please, and also how African countries could leverage on these opportunities.
How many people remember the Millennium Development Goals? You can be brave and go higher. And how many of those of you that remember the Millennium Development Goals felt that it addressed issues around gender equality? Well, that's the answer to your question. The reason why this is critical for the Sustainable Development Goals is that we listened, and the member states, the United Nations, to what was being said, the narrative that was coming out from women activists, from the women's movement, who clearly stated that the Millennium Development Goal agenda had fundamentally addressed the structural barriers related to gender inequality. And particularly within that was ending violence against women and girls, and also unpaid care work. So it was essential that the new agenda addressed these issues among other areas. Adding on to that, there's an increasing, as you've already heard, an increasing interest in gender data. And the gender data provides us with statistics and evidence that enables us to better nuance, better inform, better design, and better implement policies and programs for public action. So these were the reasons why they were critical for this report. And we therefore dedicated 2 chapters that not only identified gaps, not only looked at what were the key findings, but more specifically had a set of recommendations. These are not prescriptive, but oftentimes we are told, we understand there's a problem, but we actually don't know how to do this. This may be from a government perspective, it may be from a private sector perspective. So therefore, within the recommendations, we highlighted what tools can be used, what are the benefits. We were able to computate and quantify some of these reasons. So that's why it was essential for us. And obviously, as some of you will have heard, with regards to violence against women, it is a pandemic issue for us. I'm very pleased what Dr. Kaloka has said about the synergies between the Agenda 2063 and the SDGs 2030, because that also addresses some of these issues around violence against women, such as ending early child marriage, FGM, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, etc. With unpaid care work, it's just very simple. If you're not counted, then clearly you don't count. And if you don't count, you don't receive resources, you don't receive services, you do not engage. And therefore, for us, it was very important to demonstrate and to quantify in regards to unpaid care work, who was doing that work, what type of work was being done. And we also, in terms of the recommendations, advise on how it can be, in terms of duties, can be redistributed amongst the families and the communities, but also the state's responsibility for unpaid care work.
Thanks, Simone. We'll move on to a discussion on monitoring now. As you heard from the presentation earlier, we place a huge emphasis on the importance of data, statistics and evidence for influencing decision making. Dr. Kaloko, can you please discuss with us the regional peer review frameworks and mechanisms for peer learning and how these rely on data?
Well, the best way to look at this is to know the cascade of developments, in terms of making decisions and sending them to the member states from the point of view of the African Union. What was absent in what I'm going to tell you was informed data like what we have now. So what we do is we prepare programs. These are usually forwarded to the ministers, the different ministers on the continent in various meetings of African ministers, say of health, of finance. We prepare reports. And by the way, when we're preparing this, we usually involve everybody, agencies, civil society, and everything. The ministers will prepare the reports, and the reports are subjected to the foreign ministers' meeting, and then eventually to the summit, where the heads of state go back home and hopefully make them law. So what has been absent is effective monitoring and evaluation. And this we find it's going to be much easier with instruments like the reports now on gender equality and women's empowerment. So what happens is that in the African Union, we have checks and balances, and we have the African peer review mechanism, whereby just before every summit, what we call it APRM, it meets and various countries present reports on what they have done on various issues, like in this case, the issue of gender equality and women's empowerment. They will have to report what they did between last year and then this year on the steps they had taken towards taking forward the issue of gender equality and women's empowerment. So if it is evidence-based and it is well checked and we have implementable indicators and then the right kind of inclusivity, then the whole process becomes very, very easy. So I find this document that we have now very, very helpful, and it's going to help us in the process in the future.
Thank you. And Simone, could you please discuss the increased demand for gender data and statistics and UN Women's flagship program on this?
Okay, with regards to the increased demand, I think you succinctly referred to it in your presentation, the advantage and the benefits of disaggregated data, sex disaggregated data and age data is helpful because it informs the policies and the programs, their design and implementation. But more critically, it provides the evidence. And oftentimes, one of the arguments we're presented with is, okay, you say this is a poor situation for women and girls, but can you demonstrate that if we invest X amount in gender equality, it will actually benefit the entire society? And can you quantify that, and can you cost that? So for us to have that gender data and to move with the interest that is being shown, not just by governments, but different industries as well, we want to move with that. Now, with regards to how we go about it, the other question is, well, monitoring is terribly expensive and evaluation is terribly expensive. And yes, that's true, but you can be creative because there are already existing mechanisms, existing institutions. We have the National Bureau of Statistics. Some National Bureau of Statistics do have gender data. The quality of that gender data is sometimes not up to par. But as UN Women, we do have the tools available, and other organizations and institutions also have those in order to support those institutions to better nuance their tools and to ensure that the collection of the data, the analysis of the data, that standard tools are used, gives us comparatives across countries, within countries, across regions, and across the globe. So that's very important. I think in terms of the flagship, that might be a bit UN-y language. Essentially what it is it's a global program, and we have 12 of them, and one of them specifically focuses on gender statistics. This global program is being piloted in a number of countries. In our region, when I say our region, I mean UN Women, the Eastern Southern Africa office. We're piloting in Uganda, Tanzania, partially in Rwanda and Kenya. And what this does is it works with the existing governmental bodies in terms of ensuring that the analysis is not just gender sensitive, but it's gender appropriate, and then gives guidance on how that information can be used to inform the policymakers. But at the same time, the program is also working with organizations that are not necessarily acknowledged at a national level as official data collectors. But what it does is it shows those organizations what would be acceptable for the National Bureau of Statistics in your collation of data, and how it can be used to inform the work that you're doing at a community level and a household level.
Great, thanks. So before we go on to the third segment, if we have time for it, I want to take a moment to open up to the floor in case anyone has questions at this point for our panelists. And also hereafter, of course, I'll be around if anyone wants to talk specifically about the report.
Because she's the guru on the report.
Not necessarily, but I can try. So. Here. Does anyone? Oh, you've got the mic. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
And introduce yourself and your organization too, thanks.
All right. My name is Caroline Gadi. I come from the Organization for Women in International Trade. We promote women to access international markets. So our segment is women doing, facilitating Kenyan women to do business globally. One of the biggest challenges we have is access to markets and access to finance. And being women, we have very many challenges that we keep talking about. And we would like to see what are the policies that you're coming up with, other than supporting the grassroots women, which are the policies you're supporting to come up with for women in business and accessing international markets, because part of that is also part of economic empowerment of women. And we also have programs that we support other grassroots organizations in terms of capacity and all that. We don't have any data how the UN is doing that. Over and above that, we think that the UN can do something about it. Like the EU is a UN GM marketplace, and everything is open for everybody. And we have our members trying to access opportunities on that platform. But it is impossible to get some of those opportunities because they are very competitive. They have serious requirements of security and all that. So one of the things we want to lobby for is for you to give part of those procurement opportunities to women to trade globally, and especially for women who are actually doing business and have qualified in all forms, but maybe don't have security and something like that. All right, thanks. That's my contribution.
Very much for that. We'll take a couple of more questions and then come back with answers.
Hi, I'm Sarah Hunt-Batch-Noel from the organisation Sight Savers. We work in eye health and inclusion of people with disabilities within development. So my question is, in the monitoring that you've done so far, how has data disaggregation in terms of people with disabilities been taken into account? And what has been highlighted in the recommendations around women with disabilities in particular? Thank you.
Thanks. And we'll take the other question down the front.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Imali Ngusale from DSW. I'm also a former UNV for UN Women, so I do owe a part of my career from UN Women. I just had a quick question. Given that the continent has disproportional data, and this really goes to His Excellency, I mean, You're Honorable, given that our continent has disproportional data in terms of updates on population, employment rate, and age, how did you harmonize the needs of women under the Africa peer review? And then when designing the programs, this now goes to the head of UN Women, when designing the programs that will be implemented in Africa, how do we make sure that the bilateral agreements we have with governments ensure that there's room for social accountability? Because more often than not, we have programs for women, but they're implemented by men. So that usually does not bring any difference. And then my question on structural barriers has already been asked, so I would not repeat it. But just to finish up, is if you had a chance to advise the African Union, would you consider letting them know that women are also interested in leading the African Union? Thank you.
Thanks for your questions. So could someone let me know the time? Amanda, how long do we have? Okay, perfect. So why don't we pass it to you, Dr. Koloko, to answer the last question first?
Okay, yeah.
And then perhaps to Simone, if you want to take the first question, and I can talk to the disabilities.
Well, thank you very much. The question on giving the opportunities, to the ladies as well. This is something we've done fairly well. We had a decision by the heads of state, to actually put women forward. This was what the solemn declaration of the 50th anniversary of the African Union was all about. So the first mandate that was given to us was for all elective posts. It should be 50-50, complete parity between men and women. And I'm proud to say elected posts in the African Union at the moment, particularly at the senior level, are at 50-50 level. We're working very hard on the Charter of the Rights and the Welfare of Women, also at the Banjul Commission. It's even better, it's 60-40, 60 in favor of women. The target for the rest of the commission is to be at least 30% by 2025. Should be composed of 30%. So we're doing very well on that front. Well, we are also encouraging member states, to make sure that they position women in decision-making areas, because that's when the message can easily go across. And one very important area is parliamentarians. Parliamentarians are very important. They deal with their constituency, and at the same time, they come into parliament and help to enact laws. So we've been able to get some legal decisions and policies, over the last few years on that particular issue.
Simone?
I'm just looking for Mariam. It would be really interesting if you could have a chat. Sorry, I didn't catch your name. Imani. If you could have a chat with Imani, because we always like to know about people's journeys after working with UN Women or engaging with UN Women, and you shared that with us. So if you don't mind, we'd love to chat with you on that. Specifically to your question, I don't think it was on data, it was more on trade, women in business, which isn't the forum, but I'm still going to respond to it. I'm representing a regional office, not the Kenya office, so I will not give you exact examples on Kenya, but we will give you the contact of the Kenya office and you can engage with them. Within the region, women in business and trade is critical. We have engaged with the AUC when they were developing their trade policies on how to ensure that those policies were gender sensitive and gender responsive. In Tanzania and Zimbabwe and I think South Africa, we had a program on cross-border trade. So what was happening is with the informal trade of women, which is still business, but it's informal, the challenges they were experiencing is as they cross the border, the prices that they are told for permits is exorbitant and not correct. They don't have the material and the correct information, or they're sexually abused. So there was a collaboration there and a program in terms of how to get that information in a language that can be understood. So in some cases it was diagrams, in other cases it was in local languages, and these were shared with those groups. With women in formal business, we're talking maybe perhaps the higher level, women on boards. We've been working on that extensively in terms of the WEPs, Women Empowerment Principles. There's 7 steps which a private sector company can decide and determine whether it wants to adopt. If they adopt these principles, they themselves will choose within their own organization what is it that they can do to ensure not only is the environment conducive to women on boards or women working with them or women in business, but also to their clientele. Who are they engaging with? So there's that process as well. On procurement, I know that Kenya is leading on this area of procurement for women, and in fact, the UN Women Kenya office has been working with the government on that program. It's about not only allocating a certain percentage of the procurement tenders that go out to women, but also ensuring that the women are fully equipped to be able to write those proposals and also to be able to access and find the networks where they can get that information.
Thank you. Thanks, Simone. So to the question on disabilities and how we look at that in the report, I'm really glad you asked the question because it's something that does mean a lot to us, and we did a lot of work on it. You'll be pleased to hear. So we, in terms of the data for the report, the data section, we did some really innovative data analysis using DHS in as many countries globally as we could get it from, and we cut the data to disaggregate by disability and sex, as well as many other characteristics, and so to expose the intersecting inequalities amongst different groups of women, which I touched on in a different kind of way in the presentation, but what I didn't get into is that we also look at the multiple identities that different women have, whether it's their race, their ethnicity, their ability, sexual orientation, for example, etc., and look at how those different forms of inequality overlap to push women further behind and leave them forgotten in terms of policy making, for example. So, and you'll also hopefully be pleased to hear that we collaborated very closely with a number of disability organisations on finding proxy indicators as well, where the official indicators framework for the SDGs failed to explicitly disaggregate by disability. We worked with disability organisations and statisticians within those organisations to come up with alternative indicators that we could feasibly look into and analyse to really understand the situation for these groups of women and girls. So in terms of the policy, in the policy section of the report, which Simone spoke to earlier, being on two strategic areas, violence and unpaid care, in both of those chapters we look at how these issues affect women and girls with disabilities. And so in the care chapter, for example, we look at the needs of women and girls with disabilities, both in terms of their care needs due to their disability, but we also look at the fact that they're also carers, that often these women have children, have other people that they take care of, elderly parents, etc., and they also have needs in that sense as well, and rights. And so we take that approach, that sort of multi-pronged approach in terms of the rights of women and with disabilities. And then in terms of accountability, we also are very explicit about recommending that not just civil society organisations generally, but very specific types of groups need to be involved in the follow-up and review of the SDGs. So that includes disability organisations to ensure that their demands remain front and centre, as well as Indigenous groups, etc. So I hope that helps give you a better idea. But if you're particularly interested in the data analysis, because it's not all in the report, because the report's huge as it is, so we couldn't include it all, but we're very excited to share it. So if you want, I can share more of that information with you after. And we also came out with a policy brief last year for the HLPF, specifically on women and girls with disabilities and how that looks in the 2030 agenda. So yeah. How much time do we have? 5 minutes. Okay. Does anyone else have a question? We have a few minutes left. Is that a hand? No? Oh, okay. All right. You want to ask it? Yep, go for it.
Going, gone. Hello, is this on? My name is Catherine. I'm from Development Pathways. We specialise in social protection. I just kind of wanted to hone in a little bit, because we started talking a little bit about social protection protection, and specifically ways that you think in terms of policy, how we can factor in unpaid care work and state responsibility for sharing out some of that unpaid care work, and what kind of policies you think are around that.
We have, do you want to give the example of?
Sorry, I did miss the last part of your question because Jeff was talking to me. Do you want to go ahead?
Unpaid care work and social protection and how ways which we can respond to it. So you could give that example of the one with regards to if you invest in South Africa in child health care and how that increases employment, etc.
Yeah, so sorry, I did miss the last part of your question, but yeah, I'll just quickly sort of go back to what I raised in the presentation earlier, which is a costing study that we had done. I pointed out the example in South Africa of early childhood care and education. We also did that in Uruguay. We did in fact do it in a number of other countries, in a country in each region, but we ended up focusing on those two countries. So the idea of that was to demonstrate that it is possible for countries, regardless of their income level, to provide free early childhood care and education, and we demonstrate how that has multiple benefits for women.
But also for the country.
And yes, of course, and also for the country. I mean, we wouldn't be able to sell the case unless we pointed out that that it'll have payoffs for the rest of society. So, and we happen to make that case very strongly as well. Yeah. Should we take one more or close it up? Okay, we'll take one more very, very quickly.
Okay, my name is Chadwin Reno Fuller, work for Bariko County. My question is, considering the fact that about 70% of the agricultural, workforce is mainly women, but when you do the analysis of the ground, you realize that most of the productive assets are owned by men. So, what are some of the strategies that you can, you can think about in terms of helping the women to realize more benefits for their effort, considering the fact that most of these resources, they are owned by men, especially in pastoral communities, etc. Thank you.
It's about women's economic empowerment and agriculture. I can respond.
So in regards to women's economic empowerment in agriculture, of course that figure 70%, I think it's slightly higher actually, it is correct. And then there are the structural areas that need to be looked at. Who owns the land, how to reform the land legislation. Those are very big issues that the states need to take forward. On a lower level, if you like, on a simpler level, what we found in some countries is that there is an opportunity for women to join cooperatives, and in certain cases they actually lease the land from the men in order to produce their yield. Now that in itself brings in complications because it is a cooperative that is registered. Leasing of the land, it's all a legal document, but of course then when you go back to the household, how are the relations and the power relations going to work at that level? But those are one of the opportunities. We also have a women empowerment platform, and again this might speak to your point as well, where we have a network that brings women together in order to collaborate and to scale up their own production so that it's not just for livelihoods, but it's actually to enable them to access markets as a larger group. In order to do that. And the other area that we're looking at is climate smart agriculture, because of course we all know with the situation with the environment and environmental degradation, a large number of the women who are working on the land have the knowledge on how adaptation can work, but they don't necessarily have the tools. So we have this group called the Innovation on Rural Technologies, whereby they're looking at tools that are less labor intensive, that are affordable and that can be used by women in order to farm on their land. So those are just some of the suggestions.
Thanks, Simone. So we'll wrap up now. I'm sorry we don't have more time, but we're available after, well, Simone and I are anyway, if anyone has further questions. And we're also contactable by email. To quickly wrap up what we discussed, we talked about policies, we talked about the strategic policy areas as well as recommendations in some other specific areas. We looked at monitoring as well as accountability, what's happening at the regional level and the experiences of 2063, design and implementation, as well as what UN Women is up to in the region. And fortunately, we also got to consider the situations for some particular different groups of women. So with that, I will close now. Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. And don't forget to grab the report from our website. It's already up. Thank you very much.